I will take all of my husband's inheritance, $2.5 million for myself. Ha ha ha. When my mother returned from her trip and rushed to my father's funeral, she loudly declared that moment she arrived. What's she suddenly talking about? Ever since my father was alive, she had a habit of cheating and never acted like a mother towards me. I was honestly shocked that she would try to get then her Anne without even being there for my father's last moments and arriving late for the funeral. Don't joke around. I was filled with anger and confusion. However, at that moment, my father's company lawyer spoke up. I'm sorry, ma'am, but there is no inheritance for you to claim. What? You're kidding, right? My name is Mandy. I am a 30-year-old ordinary office worker. My father's name was David, and my mother's name is Helen. The three of us lived together. My father was a doctor with considerable wealth. He was sincere and kind in his work and not obsessed with money. I have always respected him. On the other hand, my mother had too high expectations of me. Mandy, you must become a doctor like your father. I won't accept any other profession, she always said. During my school days, if I performed poorly in tests or was just busy with club activities, she would call me useless, stupid, ugly, because you don't resemble me and lacking in kindness. Looking back, my mother probably wanted to create an ideal daughter to be envied by others. I didn't want to be a doctor. I had other dreams, so I became an office worker. When I told my father, he said, "Do what you wish, Mandy. That's what will make me happiest." But my mother opposed, saying, "Who will take over your father's hospital after we paid for your expensive education at a prestigious university? You just want to live alone in Tokyo. That's selfish. You can't manage living alone. You always disappoint me. You're a disgrace to your parents." Somehow, I convinced them to let me live alone, but the condition was to stay within the county. In the end, I could only live 5 minutes away from my parents' house. A year passed, and I was doing well at work. When my mother suddenly called, "Your father has fallen ill. My beloved father is sick." My heart raced, and I immediately took leave from work to rush home. In the end, it was just a sudden worsening of my father's chronic heart condition, not life-threatening. However, this incident led me to start taking care of my father, and I began living at home again. Though my father said there was no need to worry, I complied with my mother's strong request. But life back home was tougher than expected. My mother couldn't forgive me for not becoming a doctor and became even more strict. "Mandy, did you make pancakes for breakfast today? It was inedible. If you're ugly and can't cook, you won't be able to get married." It was honestly hard to be criticized for my cooking. If something was wrong, she could have told me more kindly. Doesn't she have the concept of indirect communication? I think the reason I'm not married is not just my fault, but someone else's too. If I were a man, I would avoid marrying a woman with such a harsh mother. I won't say it clearly, though, to avoid complications. I work and do my best in household chores while my mother is a housewife, yet she leaves my father's care to me and goes out with friends. My mother must have wanted to call me back home to take care of my father. It's difficult to tell her directly, but my stress kept building up. I started going to my father's room to vent my frustrations about her. "Benny, I'm always sorry. It must be hard doing both your job and taking care of me." "It's okay, but why did you choose someone like Mom?" "There was a famous pharmaceutical company that we did business with at our hospital, and she was the daughter of that company. A marriage proposal was made, and I had no choice but to accept it. So even back then, there were marriages without love. Helen is troublesome. She probably thinks it would be better if I just died quickly. That can't be true." "Yes. The other day she came with paper and a pen saying, 'Make sure to write in your will that I receive all the inheritance.' Why would she do such a thing?" I was bewildered that my father had been forced into a political marriage with my mother and that she demanded a will bequeathing all the inheritance to her. Doesn't she love my father at all? Was inheritance her goal from the beginning? Was her desire for me to become a doctor just to maintain social status? Various doubts crossed my mind, but my father continued the conversation. "Also, Helen has been acting strangely lately." "Anything in particular?" "Somehow, she's more concerned about fashion than before, and she started using a perfume she usually doesn't." "Now that you mention it," my father spoke, looking a bit sad and staring into my eyes, I suspect she might have found another man. That's why I'm thinking of hiring a detective agency to investigate. Indeed, my mother recently started wearing different clothes and perfumes. I was in charge of laundry, so I noticed these subtle changes. Later, my father decided to hire a detective agency, and he showed me the results. Mandy, take a look at this. With a determined expression, my father handed me the photos he took out of an envelope. These photos showed my mother dealing intimately with a man who was not my father and walking hand in hand with him into a hotel. Although I was prepared, seeing it in reality brought up intense anger and sadness. So, this confirms Mom's affair. It seems so. What should we do now, Dad? First, contact our hospital's lawyer. Tell him it's urgent and to come immediately. Okay, I've informed him. What next? Before the lawyer arrives, there are a few things we need to prepare. First, take out the will from that shelf. As I mentioned before, it's a will stating all the inheritance goes to Helen. I plan to invalidate that will with a lawyer. It's unthinkable to leave all the inheritance to a woman who cheats, not a single penny. But since you and Mom are married, doesn't she have the right to have the property in a divorce? That's the problem. Can you open the safe? I'll tell you the password now. This safe, it's something you and Mom bought together when you got married, right? Yes, it's a shared space for both of you, storing various things. Just then, the doorbell rang. Sorry to keep you waiting. I am a lawyer. Sorry for the rush. Let's discuss it with the lawyer included. After consulting with the lawyer, the will that my father had previously written at my mother's request was canceled. Later, while my mother was out, we discussed the inheritance in the detail with the lawyer without her knowing. However, during this time, my father's condition worsened, and 6 months later, his doctor told us he had only 3 months left. I couldn't stop crying all night. I still think I have to live with Mom after this. I can't, Dad. It was hard for me, still unmarried and without any siblings, to accept the reality of my only reliable father receiving a terminal diagnosis. The next day, my mother suddenly announced, I'm going on a week-long trip to Boston from tomorrow, so take care of everything here. What? Why all of a sudden? Because I already decided with my friends. It's too late to change plans now. But if you had told me earlier, Dad only has a little time left. I wish you would cherish the time with him more. How noisy! If your father gets worse, just call me then. Don't call me for anything else. I'm going now. Saying that, my mother left for her trip to Boston. I was torn between anger and concern for my father. Dead. I can't accept her anymore, knowing her husband won't live long. How can she casually go on a trip? She's not a mother to me anymore. Even this time, saying a trip with friends. It must be an affair trip with a lover. Well, let her do as she likes. Eventually, I know. But more importantly, Mandy, I'm grateful you've been taking care of me diligently. Having you as a daughter is the only good thing about marrying Helen. From now on, live as you wish. Helen wanted you to be the successor to the hospital, but I have a reliable subordinate to take care of it. So, Mandy, continue to pursue what you love. Dad, I will. Thank you. Then, just 2 days after my mother left for Boston, my father passed away, much earlier than expected. I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness and couldn't bring myself to do anything. However, since my mother was still on her trip in Boston, I had to handle everything about my father's passing alone. I contacted relatives, the hospital, my father's work colleagues, and the lawyer. My father had many relatives, so even making these calls was difficult. So many people liked you, Dad. Finally, I contacted my mother. Mom, it's Mandy. What do you want? I'm enjoying my trip right now. Dad died. What? Suddenly? But he was supposed to live for about 3 more months. How can you say that so lightly? Anyway, his funeral is the day after tomorrow, so please come back soon. And I can't just rush back. I'm in Boston right now. I haven't visited all the tourist spots yet, haven't eaten the lobster I was looking forward to, and I have a hotel reservation tonight. Your husband just died and you're casually talking about lobster? That's unbelievable. You don't have to come back anymore, bye. Although her response was as expected, I couldn't comprehend her nonchalant attitude and hung up. Then, The day of my father's funeral arrived. As expected, my mother didn't attend the funeral. Instead, my father's respected subordinates, relatives, and even people I didn't know came to offer their condolences. As the funeral was nearing, "It's the end. My mother finally showed up." "No, did I miss it? What do you mean showing up now?" "I was on a trip to Boston, so it couldn't be helped. I couldn't just leave my friends and come back." What could be so important that she neglected my father's funeral for it? Didn't her friends have any consideration? I couldn't contain my anger. By the way, about Dad's inheritance, it was about 2.5 million, right? I'm supposed to receive all of it. I wasn't surprised by the amount of the inheritance. I was shocked that my mother immediately brought up the inheritance. Do you even realize what you're saying? This isn't the place for such talk. Don't you feel anything about Dad's death? This is important. Let's finish this conversation quickly. Actually, your dad left a will. All the inheritance goes to my wife. So Mandy, you won't get a penny. Ha! My mother's assertive words about the inheritance echoed in the funeral hall. Then the attendees started whispering among themselves. Who is that incredibly rude lady? Who was that person? Look at her. That wife always the same. Bringing up such a topic at a funeral is so inappropriate. Haha. What are you all whispering about? If you have something to say it to me directly. The hall fell silent for a moment after her outburst. Her anger reached everyone present. However, the lawyer approached my mother. Excuse me, you're Helen, right? I'm a bit lost about what you're saying, and I'm the lawyer David consulted about the inheritance after his death. No good. If there's a lawyer, it'll be quicker. Please start the inheritance procedures for the 2.5 million. Could you please explain why you were supposed to inherit David's estate? Why just look at the will? It's on the shelf in the bedroom. Can you check it? Actually, that will was canceled by David. Can you check? That can't be. It's true. David asked me during his lifetime. I wrote that will under duress from Helen, but I want it canceled. Whether she didn't understand the lawyer's explanation or David's actions, my mother just tried to impose her viewpoint. What was that old man thinking doing such a thing without telling me? Well, it can't be helped. As his wife, I should still receive half of the property in the division, right? Can you proceed with the procedures quickly? At my mother's words, my father's relatives started to jeer. At this point, it's true. It's rude to laugh. Even so, that wife, not knowing and claiming inheritance rights. What's so funny? It's rude to laugh like that. While my mother was yelling, the lawyer spoke in a calm tone. Helen, you have lost the right to inherit David's estate. There must be some mistake. I'm his lawful wife. No, actually, the two of you are already divorced, so you're not his wife anymore. You're joking, right? My mother's expression turned to panic and her confidence visibly waned. The divorce papers were processed that day before David passed away. Therefore, Helen, a complete stranger, cannot inherit a single penny of David's estate. Thank you for coming to the funeral. Would you at least see his face? What do you mean? I don't understand this divorce thing. As the funeral ended and other attendees were chatting, my mother's loud voice still showed no signs of stopping. David had expressed his wish to divorce during his lifetime and consulted me about it, but I don't remember signing any divorce papers. Ha 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 ha. So it must be a forgery, right? Ha 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 ha. That's not possible. You yourself signed the divorce papers. How many times do I have to tell you? I don't remember signing anything. It seems you've completely forgotten. You signed it at the beginning of your marriage, didn't you? At the beginning of our marriage? Yes. At the beginning of your marriage, you both prepared a marriage certificate and a divorce paper, and signed a divorce paper as well, with the understanding that if anything unpleasant happens, we will immediately file this. Didn't David also say at that time, if that's the case, I'll file it too if there's a problem? David didn't forget that promise. My mother paused, thinking. Then her expression turned to realization, and she bit her lip. I thought that time? But isn't something signed so long ago not valid anymore? Unfortunately, no matter how old, if the intent is clear, there is no statute of limitations. And the divorce papers have been processed, so they can't be invalidated. So you mean I can't receive the inheritance? Yes, that's correct. The entire estate will be inherited by Mandy, David's daughter. Here is the new will he wrote. No way. So I get nothing after being married for decades? It's unfair not to receive anything. However, there was one thing David left for you, Helen. What is that? A demand for the payment of compensation. What compensation? Yes, he is asking for a payment of $50,000 as property division in the event of a divorce. Why should I pay the property division? This is the reason. The lawyer presented Helen with photos. They showed her entering a hotel with a young man and being intimate in a fancy bar. Seeing the photos of my mother's infidelity, I thought a normal daughter wouldn't want to see such things. But I felt no emotion, as I no longer saw her as my mother. Yes, these were submitted by the detective agency as evidence of infidelity. Infidelity is a valid reason for divorce, so you will be required to pay $50,000 in the property division. Now that the inheritor of the estate has changed from the decades to the heir, Mandy will be the recipient. But my mother looked at me with eyes pleading for help. Mandy, you'll share some of the inheritance with your mother, right? You're my daughter, aren't you? You're not planning to keep it all for yourself, are you? I have no intention of giving the inheritance to someone who is neither family nor anything else to me. I responded coldly to my mother. Her attitude of still demanding money in such a situation infuriated me. How greedy, planning to keep it all to yourself? That's my line. Who was it that selfishly wanted to take everything in the first place? Don't you have any respect for your mother who gave birth to you? Who do you think has been supporting you all this time? It was Dad who supported me. You always oppose everything I wanted, calling me no good, stupid, heartless. And when Dad got sick, you left all the caring to me. You're not my mother or anything to me. The relatives listening to her argument looked at my mother with even more disdain. Struggling with the situation, Helen continued tearfully. I apologize for everything. Please just overlook the payment. I can't come up with $50,000. You're my blood-related daughter, aren't you? You used to be a kind child. I raised you strictly because I wanted you to become a fine person. That's why I now consider you a stranger. I'm cutting off our relationship as mother and daughter here. From now on, please communicate through the lawyer. The payment can be in installments. It doesn't matter if you have to work yourself to death or sell your organs, just pay it. However, if there's any delay, I'll consider reporting it to the police. We won't be seeing each other again. Goodbye. After I spoke coldly, my mother burst into tears, and we, the relatives, left the scene. Later, I heard from the lawyer that my mother started working part-time to pay the compensation, working tirelessly without any breaks. The payment is $50,000, but I don't need that much money. It's essentially the property division for my father, and by receiving it properly, I believe he would be satisfied. My mother, who used to be a carefree housewife, now seems to struggle with her unfamiliar job. Although I feel a sense of justice served, seeing her desperately working in the prepared food section of a supermarket did make me feel a bit sorry for her. I have not used any of the inheritance I received from my father, saving a portion and donating the rest to his hospital, other medical institutions, and charities. I don't want to become a greedy person who keeps everything for myself. And I've heard that a lot of money can change people. And now that I have no family, I've decided to live my life for myself and to make a new start. I'm thinking of